Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. So I got a request in the comments a couple of months ago to do an intro on Git and GitHub and how I use it and how you set it up. So I thought, why not give the people what they want? And today I will be going over how you set up Git, GitHub, and the most common commands I use to run Git on my computer. So without further ado, we're just gonna jump right in. All right, so first things first, what is Git? Git is essentially a system that records the snapshots of your code and lets you push them to the internet. And what's really nice about using Git is that you have a main version of the code, and from this main version you can actually make different branches, which are different versions of your code that you can then make changes to, and respectively you can also push each of these branches to the internet as well. You can think of these branches kind of like drafts, where any change you want to make to the real code, you don't have to have it impact the main code until you're ready to actually formally introduce those changes to your main code. And it definitely saves you from having to have a version 1, a version 2. You don't need any of that. So when you use Git, you actually have a code base that's stored on a remote repository. And this is essentially like a folder. This is my very bad drawing of a folder. And this is your project, and it'll be stored on the internet. And a repository is essentially the project or the folder for your project, which is stored on the internet. And repositories provide a way for developers to collaborate on their code using this branching system that we mentioned before. And they use those snapshots so they can see the history of the different changes that people have made to the repository itself. It also means that because we have this main repository, that each person can actually have their own local versions of this repository, which they can make changes to. And then whenever they're ready to make the changes on their local environments, each person can make the change back to the internet version. And everyone over here, for example, that's still developing on their own local versions, they can actually pull the remote version whenever they're ready and whenever, so that it doesn't interrupt the work that they're currently doing. So this way people can download their own copies of the repository instead of it being just on the central servers, and people can now work in parallel instead of having to all work on a Google Doc at the same time and interrupting each other's changes. So now that I'm done with the drawing portion, this is GitHub. It's a repository hosting service, which basically means it's a platform where developers can host and collaborate on the code. It's probably the most common version control platform out there, and gives you a beautiful representation and extra tooling for all the information from the Git repositories that we were talking about earlier. Hence the name GitHub. So first things first, you're going to want to set up a GitHub account. You should be able to do this for free, and it's a pretty step-by-step process, so I'll leave it out. Just follow the instructions on the screen. So this is where it gets interesting, setting up Git on your local machine. I'm on my Windows machine right now, so I'm going to stick to how to set it up using Windows with the Linux terminal I've set up before in one of my previous videos, if you find the link on the top right. I'm going to be showing you how to set it up using the command line, because that's how I've personally done it before. So first thing you're going to want to do is go to this link over here, which I'll have in the description, and download Git. Next, you're going to want to set up Git with your username and email from GitHub from a couple of steps ago. So you can do that by writing git config username, but set it as the global variable, and then you just want to type in your username here in quotes. I already have Git set up this way, so I'm going to leave this out. And the next thing you're going to want to do is set up your email the same way. So you want to do global and then user.email, and then over here you want to do email.com. After that, if you want to check everything set correctly, you can just type in this command, git config --global user.email, or the same with user.name, without the quotations where you added your name and email, and it should tell you exactly what your email or username is set to. So the next thing to do is actually to set up SSH with your Git and GitHub account. So you can do that by following the instructions here. Again, I'll put a link in the description, but I can go ahead and give an example of how this works, and I'll probably end up blurring out some stuff just because your SSH keys are personal to your computer and hacking is bad. So we're going to follow this guide to add a new SSH key to your GitHub account. So let's click on that. So you should definitely check if you have existing SSH keys. Otherwise, I'm just going to go with generating a new SSH key and adding it to the SSH agent. So what we're going to do is try to paste this command, and we're going to see how it works. So if we look here, we see it's generating a public and private key pair, and we just want to save the key to a specific file. So this file here, yeah, it works. It should be in the SSH file, and it has an ID, so I'm just gonna go with this. Oh, it looks like it already has one, so I'm gonna click no. All right, so now that we have that generated, perfect. And as you can see here, we did see these steps. And you can enter a passphrase for your SSH key. I would recommend doing so. And then now we want to add it to the SSH agent. So what we can do here is we want to start this in the background. So there we go. It's running. All right, so now that you have your SSH keys all saved up and generated and everything, you want to actually copy the contents of your public key to your clipboard. So how a public key and private key works is that you have a private key, which is specific to your computer. This is like your computer's password. You don't want anyone else to see your private key. But it comes with a paired public key, which is where you can put it into GitHub. So what we're going to do is copy this over, if you use pbcopy, for example, in this. And you will take the contents of that from your clipboard, and where you want to paste it is if you go to GitHub and go to your settings, you should then see an SSH and JPG keys on the left over here. And then if you click on the top right, there should be an add new SSH key button, for example, right here. And then you want to give this a title, something like, yeah, sure, like Meral's Windows Desktop. And then you want to paste the contents of your public key. Again, I can't emphasize enough that this should be your public key into this. And once you add it, GitHub will basically recognize your computer because it will check the public key and then the private key on the pair that they match on your computer, and you should be able to use GitHub without having to put your password in each time if you make changes to your code. All right, so now that all that setup's done, we're gonna go ahead and create our first new repository from scratch. How we're going to do this is, first of all, go to your GitHub account and then click over here next to this new button. So over here, you can see that you get to a create new repository page. So we're going to go ahead and under our ownership, we are going to create a repository. I'm just going to call it test GitHub repo. You can add a description if you want. I'm not going to. And I'm going to set mine personally to private because I don't want everyone to see that I'm testing a GitHub repo. Then there's a few other things you can add on, like a README file, a git ignore, and a license. So I'm just going to add the README file for now because I just want to have something there as something we can change for an example. You can also add a git ignore, which basically tells Git all the files that it should ignore when it makes any changes and pushes them to GitHub. So I'm going to go ahead and create a repository. From here, we want to make sure we can download this and have it on our local machine. How we're going to do that is we're going to go to this code button over here, and since we have SSH set up, we are going to take this SSH link over here, copy it, and we're going to go switch over to our terminal. So in our terminal, we are going to clone this repository. Again, this basically means we're going to download it, and how we're going to do that is with git clone, and we are just going to put in that link we just copied over there. So over here, and over here, as you can see, it might ask you for your passphrase for your SSH key. So I'm going to go ahead and type mine out. So from here, we should be able to CD into that test GitHub repo folder because it basically pulls the entire folder onto your machine. And there we go. We can see that we successfully switch directories into this folder. And if you just like ls just to see what's in here, you can see our readme file is also in there. So let's try making a change so we can see how GitHub actually sets everything up and how we're actually going to interact using Git. So using VS Code, I just opened that same folder that we were just looking at, the test GitHub repo, and I'm going to open up the readme. As you can see right now, there's nothing in here, so I'm just going to add something really basic. I'm just going to say hi. So now that we have those changes, we want to make sure that they're actually being picked up by Git. So what we can do here is type git status. And as you can see, it gives you a bunch of information. It tells you which branch you're on. I'm on the main branch. Then we can see that it's up to date with Origin, which is the original place that our repository is at. So within GitHub, it would refer to basically this. And we can also see that we have no changes staged for a commit, which means that we have no changes that we have said, yes, we are going to push those up to GitHub. So right now you see it's red because it's modified but not actually added to be staged. So what we're going to do here is that we're going to just go ahead and add that file by writing git add, and we're going to add that file over there. And then if you look at the git status again, it tells you that it's now going to be committed when we do commit it. And if you'd notice over here, I do have a few neat little tooltips that are telling me again which branch I'm on, and also how many files I have committed, as well as over here earlier before we added it, how many files have been modified. So if you want access to that, you can visit my earlier video again of ZSH and setting up this terminal over here. So next thing we're going to do is just commit those files. So how we're going to do that is by writing git commit. And you see that it opens up a text editor with what you can add as your commit message. So I'm just going to write something like test GitHub by updating README. And here it also gives you like a quick overview of the changes that you're going to make. So I'm gonna now hit Control S and then Control X. That's because I was using Nano. So Vim will do something different where you actually have to use some shortcuts like to save it, but I'm not gonna go over that in this video. How you enter in your commit message depends on your text editor or your default text editor. So now that we made the commit, you can see here that we have updated the README and it's been changed and added and everything, so it's been committed. So if I do another git status, so we can see here that our branch is actually ahead of the main branch now because we have that one extra commit that we just made. So how we can push that or upload it to the internet is by using git push. So we're going to do just that by writing git push origin, and origin basically refers to, again, your repository on the internet that we had open, and we're going to put in the branch name. So we want to push the main branch to the origin location. All right, it's going to ask for a password again. So, all right, and you can see that it has been pushed. So if we go over here to our repo on GitHub, we should, so you can see this is from 5 minutes ago. We made the initial commit when we created it. So now we're going to refresh. And you can see that our last commit was 2 minutes ago. We have 2 commits and this hi has been written, which means, yay, all our changes are now live on GitHub. And that's the basics of how you set up a repository. There's a whole bunch of other things you can add, like pipelines and different branches and stuff. We're going to go over a couple of things on how I use Git on my day-to-day, and hopefully that will shed some light on some basics. So now I'm going to walk through my most common commands as a quick sneak peek for what I use when I use GitHub every day. And we're going to start by creating a new branch. So I'm going to do that by writing git checkout -b. So we're going to check out a new branch. The -b is for a new branch, and we're going to enter a branch name. So let's call it like test branch or something. So we've switched to this new branch, test branch. So if we want to switch back to main for any reason, we can do git checkout, and we just want to put the branch name, so main, and you see we switch back to main. So let's go back to test branch because that's where we're actually going to do things. All right, test branch. So if you want to see all the branches you have locally, how you can do that is by writing git branch. And you see here it opens up a text editor, and because I don't have a lot of branches, it just tells you these are the 2 branches I have checked out locally. So if for whatever reason you want to delete a branch that you've made locally and nothing's been pushed to it, it hasn't been pushed onto GitHub, you can use this command, git branch -d, and then your branch name. And notice that I'm on the main branch for this. You don't want to be on the branch that you're deleting. And I tend to do this a lot because sometimes I name a branch the wrong thing and I type too fast to notice until after I've made the branch. So we can do something like this. So as you can see, now the test branch is deleted. If we look at all our branches again, you can see we only have main. So I'm going to go ahead and create that branch again. -b test branch. And from here, we're just going to make some changes just to give an example of how a normal flow would work. So if we switch back over to VS Code, we're going to write something like testing changes. And you know what, let's for fun add something like change an actual line. So you can see here that it's now 3 eyes. All right, so back in our terminal, let's go ahead and check the status again, because I literally do this every time I make a change. I'd write git status. I see that the README file has been changed. So something else you can do is see what those changes are, and how we can do that is by writing git diff. This gives you all the different changes you've made to all the files in your current branch. So if I had 3 files, for example, and I'd made changes to all of them, it would show all the changes in each file. If you want to see the changes for just a single file, you could just put in that file name. So let's just do that for now because we only have the one file. And you can see here, it shows you all the different changes. So the line for hi has been quote unquote removed just because it's different now. And you see we've replaced it with hi and testing changes. So this looks about right to me. So I'm going to quit that. Let's say we want to add another file here. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new file here, test.py. So we have that file. Let's just throw it in there. Why not? All right, so let's say for whatever reason, we only want to update the README file in the repository on GitHub and not the test.py. Like it might be an environment variable that you only use to test locally, and we don't want to push it up there. So there is actually a way to only push the tracked file. So in this case, the README, which would be the hi and the testing changes that we had earlier. So we can do that by writing git add -u, which means only the tracked files, and the period because we want to target this directory. So if we run a git status here, you can see only the tracked files have actually been stored. So now let's go ahead and commit this. So let's write git commit, and there is actually a shortcut to write the git message straight away, and that is -m. So we're going to say updating README for a second time. All right, so we can see that the updating README for a second time message has been recorded, and these changes have been committed. So let's do a status just to make sure. Yeah, so they're not showing as modified anymore as they were before, and they've actually been committed. So one way you can actually make sure that your changes have been committed is by checking the logs. So you can do that by typing git log. And you can see here that we have this updating README for a second time has been made earlier, and here's the commit hash, and you can see where it's been made as well, the test branch, and the date and time if you care about that. So now that I've committed my changes, what I'm going to do is actually push them onto that new branch. So we're going to run that git push again, and this time with our branch name, which is test branch. And we're going to go ahead and type our password again, and there you go. Now you can see that we have our test branch being picked up in GitHub. So we can go and check that, and you can see here that a test branch has been pushed less than a minute ago. So there are a couple of ways now that you could merge those changes onto the main branch. So what you could do, and is highly not recommended unless it's your own project or you're working on a hackathon and you've agreed with your team that you can do this, is that you could merge, you could go check out to the branch that you want to merge your changes into, so in this case main, and you could do git merge and then type in your branch name. And that would merge your changes from test branch into the main branch. But there's a lot of things that can happen in terms of merge conflicts, and also like you don't have a visual between the differences for the two branches. So what most companies would prefer you to do is that you open a pull request. So if we go over here and you see this notification that we had earlier, we can actually compare and pull request. So yeah, it like fills in a title. You can write a message, merging test changes. I'm just going to write that. You usually want this to be a bit more descriptive because if you're working at a company, they want to know what these changes are. So actually, let's merging changes to demonstrate GitHub merging. And this uses Markdown, so you could actually just like get really fancy with the formatting, but I'm just going to leave it at that for now. And if you scroll down a bit more, you see all the different changes that you've made and the difference between the main branch and this normal branch. So sure, let's just create a pull request. Why not? So as you can see, it checks for any conflicts and also checks against continuous integration. So as you can see, there are no conflicts with the base branch, and I don't have continuous integration set up. So that would usually be all your checks and tests to make sure that everything on your branch is clean and running properly, and that there's no lint errors and things like that. But since this is a basic tutorial, we are just going to go ahead and merge that pull request. Usually you might need a reviewer to actually look at all the things you've changed and approve the branch for you if those restrictions have been set up, but this is just me. And you can see the pull request was successfully merged and closed. And now we are going to delete the branch because we technically don't need it anymore. There we go. Our changes are in there. Nice. So now that we have those changes all populated on the intranet, we want to make sure we have those changes locally in the main branch, because we merged that on the intranet on GitHub, not actually in our local environment. So how we can do that is by writing git pull, and that should pull all the changes that are currently on main into that branch. All right. And you can see here that there was a fast forward, and it also pulled all the changes for README. So if I look locally, you can see they're there as well. All right, so one last thing I'm going to demonstrate is what if you're working on this project with a couple of people from your team or your company, and there's multiple changes going on at once. So I'm going to do something which you shouldn't do unless this has been approved by your team, is I'm going to make changes straight onto main. And this is just to demonstrate if changes had been pulled into the main branch and you are on a different branch and need to make sure those changes are also encompassed locally. So I'm going to go ahead and change this and add it. All right, so I now have changes on my main branch. So let's say I'm an engineer that is working on another branch, and that branch is going to be test branch 2, which I made earlier. So I'm on test branch 2, and if I take a look, I see I have one change from that test.py that we had earlier. So there are now changes on the main branch that I want to make sure I have on my local branch. So one way you could do this is merge the other way. Remember before we were going to merge changes into the main branch? Now we want to merge the main branch into our test branch. So one thing you could do is actually git merge main, and that would merge the main branch into your branch, kind of similar to what we were talking about earlier, but this is okay because you're merging the main branch into your working directory. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. And as you can see, we should have these changes. Yep, there they are. All right, so another way we can do this, I just made some changes on the main branch again, which just reverted back to high basically. I just deleted everything that was there. Is we can rebase. So what rebasing is that it essentially takes the changes you have in your local directory and applies them onto master and places them on top of what's already in the main branch. This picture here is actually a great representation of what this means. So say you're on your main branch, it used to be called master, but now it's called main on GitHub, and you've made your feature branch, which has these commits here that you've branched off of. So what you do with a merge is that you would merge it back, but if you were to rebase and say you had your feature branch coming off this commit here, like as you see right here, what it would do is that it would take main and actually apply your new changes on top as if you've made them after everything that's on main. So that avoids a lot of conflicts, and it means that you have the most up-to-date without merging it. You just place it right after everything that's already on main. So that might not be the clearest description, but I'll put a link in the description below that will probably explain it better and has a whole link to how rebasing works. So we're gonna go ahead and try rebasing this. So let's make a commit first for that test.py. So we're gonna add test.py, git commit, adding test.py. Okay, so that's committed. So before we push, we want to rebase off of main. So we want basically our new base to be main. So we're going to do git rebase and then -i, which means we want the rebase to be interactive, and this gives you a lot of tools on how to apply your rebase. And we're going to say main because that's the branch we want to rebase off of. So as you can see here, there's a bunch of commands you can use that all have different purposes. So you can reword your commit by changing this pick here into an R. You can edit the commit if you need to, But essentially, it'll take all of these commits you have here and place it after the latest commit on main. So it attaches your changes onto the main branch. So I'm going to go ahead and say, yes, this is what we want to rebase. Which basically means I don't need to make any changes to this file. It just picks all of the commits, applies them straight onto main. So I'm going to go with a Command S and then exit. All right, so as you can see, it went ahead and successfully rebased the commit. So there are some cases where it gets a bit messy, where if you rebase, it'll actually take you through each commit, and you can go ahead and solve conflicts using that, but we're not going to get into that today because I'm just giving a basic tutorial. But you can read up about it. All right, and that's a quick overview of how I use Git in my day-to-day. If you want a bit more of an in-depth tutorial on, like, for example, how I use rebasing, which isn't a lot because it's something new I learned recently, let me know in the comments. And that's a wrap on how to set up GitHub and Git and how I use it in my day-to-day. I hope some of you find this useful, and let me know if there's any commands that you use on a day-to-day basis in the comments below. And I'll be back soon with another video. Thanks everyone, and have a wonderful week. See you soon, friends!